Hello, and welcome to the Future of Energy Expert Roundtable at Second Look News. I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of Second Look, Stacia Wilson, and co-hosting with me today is Nathan Smolensky, author of our recent article, Whatever Happened to the Fuel of the Future? You can read that article and more at secondlook.news. With us today for a roundtable discussion, we have experts from the field of oil and gas, nuclear, and wind. By rejoining the Paris Agreement, the U.S. has committed to drastically cutting carbon emissions, but our energy needs aren't going away. What is the future of energy? Are the alternatives up to the task? Let's start with introductions. So we have Jason Holstein representing wind. We have Mark Schneider representing nuclear, and we have Alma Cook and Kevin Hobby representing oil and gas. Jason, would you like to start by giving us a little about yourself, your name, your title and experience?
I'm Jason Holston. I'm a site safety specialist in the wind industry. I've got 8 years in EHS, so some of that was oil and gas, but I'm in the wind industry now.
Nice, thanks. And Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, so I did 23 years in the nuclear power industry, 20 years with the United States Navy, then 3 years at a commercial power plant. So I've seen scale of reactors from down to the 100 megawatt range up to the 1,000 megawatt range. But I also spent a lot of time working with the advanced nuclear companies, and my wife is also a nuclear engineer, so we kind of nerd out on talking about nuclear power all the time. So.
Nice. And Alma, go ahead.
That's so cool about your wife, Mark. My name is Alma Cook. I am, the company that I own is based in the Williston Basin. That's Williston, North Dakota. And I work primarily in supply chain, which is a fancy word that basically means I stand in the gap between the small businesses that really make the oil and gas industry run and the larger operators that are the ones investing in these large-scale oil and gas projects. And I keep that relationship happy. I'm something of a marriage counselor between them. And Jason, having a background in EHS, that's environmental health and safety, and I believe Kevin also has a background in safety, they'll understand a little bit of what I'm talking about there, because a lot of that relationship has to do with making sure nobody dies, for example. So that's where I sit.
It's important. Cool, thanks, Alma. And go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, so I'm Kevin Hobby. I'm Vice President of Basin Consulting. We are we're pioneering some technology and some proprietary stuff that we're going to make some old wells carbon neutral, and in the process add some server space and mine some altcoins. So that's what we're doing out here.
Awesome, thanks. Then I'm going to hand it off to Nathan to get into our questions.
All right. Thank you, Stacia. And I guess we'll start off with sort of the topic of the day, which is this legislative shift, the U.S. rejoining the Paris Accords, and more countries joining the Paris Accords, where it's a rather binding commitment to emissions cuts. And we hear a lot of activist perspectives. We hear a lot of politician talking points, and we want to get a sense of sort of industry perspectives on what that's doing to industry and what you guys believe that's going to do to the economy and beyond. So Kevin, I guess we'll loop back around, start with you.
Well, joining the Paris Accord, if you look at the actual breakdown, and I know that this is something that gets touted mainly by the right, but the amount of emissions that are actually being cut down by the Paris Accord is not substantial. But what it is going to do is it is going to impede, especially in oil and gas, it's going to impede the ability for small producers to be able to come in and compete. That's what we're seeing right now in the industry. They're not able to come out and meet these emission standards right off the bat because you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment that's needed right off the bat just to get started. So you have majors and super majors who are swallowing up these smaller companies, and basically what you're getting is a polyopoly, whatever you want to call it, an aristocracy. You've got basically 6 or 7 majors and super majors that are going to control the majority of the oil and gas market because they're able to afford. It's going to drive, as far as domestic production, it's going to drive that down while also helping in countries like India and China who are still reliant on coal, which is responsible for the majority of carbon emissions. When you look at the breakdown of carbon emissions, especially in America, oil and gas production only accounts for 3.2%. Livestock and cattle account for about 14.7%, which livestock and cattle are not addressed anywhere in the Paris Accord. So I really question the legitimacy of what they're touting. If this is really about reducing carbon emissions, why are we not moving countries like India and China over to clean burning natural gas or thorium reactors? And why are we not addressing the major polluters like the livestock industry and things like that? I think overall it's going to increase energy costs in America. It's going to push us towards less reliable energy sources. And it's going to give major power to these huge corporations that are able to kind of manipulate the market and create false scarcity whenever they want. I overall think it's a pretty bad thing. Anytime that you try to manipulate the market, it usually turns out bad.
All right. Alma, you want to follow it up from there?
Yeah, I tend to be in agreement with that, Kevin. Anytime somebody starts sticking their fingers in the market, I get a little bit queasy. I tend to think, people say politics is downstream of culture, right? Whatever's happening in the White House is kind of representative of what's already happening on the ground. And that's kind of how I tend to think of these showy documents that you'll have nations sign off on. They don't tend to have a lot of teeth, for one. So, setting aside, even if they did have teeth, the effect that they would have on the small operators that Kevin mentioned, I tend to think that the consumer is going to get what the consumer wants, and the consumer wants oil and gas. And if you want to fundamentally change, the shit that we're putting into the air, you've got to fundamentally change what the consumer is doing. And that is a conversation I don't think America is prepared for, no matter how badly we want our politicians to sign onto a document. But yeah, other than that, I completely co-sign what Kevin said.
Yep. Now, I just want to follow up on that very briefly. When you talk about changing what we're doing, is that in terms of just the sheer amount of energy we consume, or at the sort of, or not at the consumer level in terms of where we get the electrical sources, in terms of where we get the fuel sources that we do?
Yeah, I think that the sheer amount of energy we consume is a very interesting conversation and not one that you hear very often being aired. Of course, you'll meet people who love the idea of reusable bags, and so you've got your tote bag wearing hipsters who just relish the idea that they're consuming fewer plastic bags, which, by the way, consume a lot less energy to produce than one of your canvas bags. But things are simple. I'm a bit of a corporate hippie in this way, if I can be candid with you, Nathan. Something as simple as having your own house, having your own car. We like to have our own everything. Why do you have a lawnmower when your neighbor has a lawnmower as well, and you could develop some kind of sharing economy? Those are questions that I don't hear people digging into very often. Now, as a community-minded person, I'm happy to engage in that way. I prefer that kind of lifestyle, and I like it. But I think that most of America doesn't, at least not now. And so if you're looking to change the overall consumption, you're looking at, fundamentally changing the way we interact with our neighbors and the way that we get to work, or the types of jobs that we're having. It's such a fundamental shift that we don't even graze it most of the time. Does that answer your question, Nathan?
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think we'll go to Mark and your thoughts on this sort of legislative shift and what it's going to do, or what it's already done.
My take on it is to the oil and gas industry, welcome to government intervention in your industry, because that's what I've experienced basically my entire adult life. I'm in the most regulated industry on the planet with the highest safety record. Without that excessive regulation, actually, we were still the safest industry, and yet we're still touted as being dangerous and bad, even though we have the zero carbon emissions, best safety record of any power or any electricity production, on the planet. And, the Paris Accords, honestly, for nuclear is almost a moot point. If you look at, France is 70% nuclear, right? And it has the lowest carbon emissions of basically any first world nation. Germany, right next door, has like 5% nuclear and has the highest carbon emissions of any first world nation. So, and by the way, Germany's electricity costs twice as much as France's electricity. Oh, and France taxes the hell out of their electricity too.
All right. And then I guess, Jason, it seems like you've been a little on and off. You all right to answer?
Apparently, I'm having service issues, though.
All right.
The legislation going forward just seems like it's more aimed at who can make the most money off of what industry. To me, it seems a little bit off.
Okay.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit? What do you mean by it seems off?
Kind of like what Kevin said. The livestock industry creates most of your carbon emissions. Therefore, but they're cracking down on industries such as oil and gas, nuclear, wind. All of this. So it really just seems on who owns what and who's making the most money off of this legislation is what driving these legislative moves.
Gotcha. Can I jump back real fast to something Mark said? He said nuclear is the safest industry. I remember bringing that up when you were writing the article, Nathan, and you were like skeptical. And so not to call you out, but just we were talking about it. So I'd love to hear from Mark just what you mean by like how you figure nuclear is the safest.
Yeah, so if you look at, deaths caused by your energy source, right? What per unit of energy, whether it's terawatt hour, or kilowatt hour, whatever, right? Nuclear, the only thing that actually beats nuclear is solar farms, right? And this is including the deaths at Chernobyl, including, the deaths at SO1, including the one sketchy cancer death that Fukushima has been attributed to Fukushima. It has the best rate as far as a safety margin compared to all other power. I'm going to kind of rag on wind a little bit here, but in 2014, wind killed 14 people in the UK alone, right? So that's a person a month falling off of a wind turbine and dying, right? So, and that's in one country. Worldwide, if you look at nuclear, there have been, by the way, I worked at Surrey Power Station, which has the worst death record of any nuclear power plant in the US. It's been online operating for over 40 years and has had like 3 deaths, right? So, when you're looking at the amount of power generated at Surrey Power Station, it's produced more power than the wind and solar industry have in the United States, one power plant.
Mark, are you measuring that by the safety by man hours or by kilowatt hour of energy produced? Or I'm curious about that.
The terawatt hour, so per energy.
Okay.
Okay.
Just to piggyback on that, I think Mark can correct me if my numbers are wrong, but so when we measure safety, we talk about a TRIR, which is a total recordable incident rate. That's per million man hours. So this is how many people are maimed or killed per million man hours. Oil and gas averages around like 1. And I think nuclear is like 0.001. It might be 0.01, but it's extremely low overall.
Yeah, you're definitely, your numbers sound about right.
And that includes the people who don't work in nuclear from like Chernobyl and stuff. So
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
because that
Okay.
would be it'll be all over. And when you talk about like oil and gas, when you talk about the overall numbers, this is going to be like since the inception of OSHA, basically, or ANSI 1. But I think I'm almost positive that it's 0.001. So that would be 0.001 deaths or major injuries per million man hours worked, which is pretty spectacular. I mean, if you have a company that has a TRIR of 0.001, that's like that's a really high end company overall. Is at that.
Yeah. When I see a number like that, I think, oh, you just haven't been in business for very long. Just wait till this time next year, buddy.
Well, and it's interesting when you talk about that, because they actually do nuclear. They do two versions of that. They have one where they include Chernobyl and one where they exclude Chernobyl, and like it's a factor of 1,000 between the two. So like Chernobyl is basically makes the nuclear industry 1,000 times worse than it actually is. One
Talk about
incident-
skewing the average. Holy cow.
I mean, it killed 51 people, which is basically, yeah. It's terrible. We don't want RBMK. I want to shut them all down.
Okay. Well, thanks. Let's move on to the next question then.
Yeah. And I think this is really following up on a lot of the points made, which were talking about politics downstream of culture and these sort of misconceptions around the Paris Agreement. And I sort of wanted to pose the question of how you all see public perception around energy consumption, around energy sources, around the fuel industry that you work in, and what those biggest misconceptions are, like that the public has. And if you want to take any extra time to address those, I guess, Mark, since you're already sort of on that road, we can start with you.
Yeah, so the nuclear industry gets lots of crazy misconceptions. I think the first one, which is crazy, is that a lot of people don't know it's carbon free, that it doesn't produce CO2 in the production of energy. That's the biggest one. The other one, and I learned this doing a speech to a bunch of high school, about to become college age students, is that nuclear industry provides 20% of the energy for the United States and 55% of our carbon free energy, right? And then, wind and solar are down in the 5% range. And then the majority of the remaining carbon-free energy is actually from hydroelectric. Those are a couple exceptions. The other is that nuclear waste, or spent nuclear fuel, as I prefer to call it, is dangerous, right? It's dangerous, going to last forever, and we're going to have to manage this stuff. It's safely managed, and any one of us can walk up to a spent fuel container and hug it and get no appreciable amount of radiation from it whatsoever. And I've done that. So I have no issues with that. I do it again. You asked me to go hug a spent fuel container, I just go do it just because it's fun. So.
All right.
There are tree huggers, and then there's nuclear waste huggers.
Yeah. All right. I guess Alma will go to you.
Sure. Mark, I really enjoyed what you just shared. And I feel your pain, buddy. That sucks. You have straight A's and nobody knows about your report card. There's two misconceptions that come to mind right away with oil and gas. There are many, so I'll save at least one for Kevin. But one that's very close to my heart is this impression that America has that oil and gas is this like corporate, there's some maniac sitting at the top of a corner office with his hands rubbed together, like just plotting to take over the world. And he's so detached from the people on the ground who are experiencing the maleffects of his evil industry. Well, because I work with a small business owner and I see that basically the entire industry is run on the back of mom and pop shops, I have a lot of, I have such a soft spot for the small business aspect of oil and gas. And I recognize that this is not just when people say big oil, they don't know what they're talking about. There is no one big oil. Yes, there's these major producers, there's your BPs, your Shells, your Exxons, but there are a lot of really small ones too. And then to say nothing of the contractors working underneath them doing the welding and the insulation and pipeline, everything down the line. So that's a note that I like to sing loud whenever I can. There's also this misunderstanding, I think, throughout the nation and the world about the simple ubiquity of oil and gas. I mean, I'm looking at the speaker system in front of me. I'm looking at this laptop. I'm looking at this cup. I'm looking at the varnish on the table, the paint on the walls. Everything in this room would disappear were it not for the petrochemical products that made it possible. Healthcare equipment, the what goes into a pill. How do you sterilize your medical equipment facilities? The fertilizer that went into the food that you're eating was made with natural gas. And, I think that there's very little appreciation and gratitude for how much of your life would change if you snapped your fingers and made this industry that you hate disappear. Not saying you on this panel, but you, the American activist, you. So those are the two points that come to mind for me: is the corporate side, the corporate versus small business, and then the ubiquity of it.
At least you don't have Mr. Burns as your face of the evil corporate, stooge that is in charge of your.
Yes. Yeah, and at least we don't have green sludge as the image of our waste.
Even though it's a solid.
It's a solid, guys. It's a freaking rod.
In the thing of The Simpsons, though, it was a solid that got stuck to Homer Simpson.
Yeah, and it glue.
Someone got something right.
The rod.
Green, but it actually blows glue.
I think I was watching something on this. It's all that whole image is taken from radium and radium paint that became just the image of everything radioactive or anything to do with atomic energy, nuclear energy.
It's actually the basis of it is from a Popular Mechanics article from the 1950s.
Oh.
Using lead glass, and the flash from the camera reflected off the glass and gave a greenish yellow glow.
Oh, interesting. Oh.
Well, that's wonderful information. There's a couple in misconceptions on wind as well. A lot of people see it as you're destroying our pastures and destroying our views of the pasture land and things of that nature. I hear that one quite a bit. And then I also hear about how wonderful wind is because it's a renewable resource and it's so great for the world, right? But there's a lot of waste and a lot of people don't realize there's a lot of oil that goes into wind turbines. We have to use semi trucks to haul our components to site. Our gearboxes take 55 gallons of oil per, and we change it every 6 months. It's a bit of a mess, and there's a lot of misconceptions with it as well.
Fascinating.
All right. And then Kevin, if you want to.
Can I interject real quick?
Yep.
Jason, you are the first wind expert that has ever brought up any of that I have ever encountered. So I appreciate that.
Man, I'm no expert, bro. I just work in the industry, but I call it as I see it. I try to be non-biased to one or the other. And our blades are made of fiberglass and wood, and we change those every 15 to 20 years. And they normally end up in landfills because it's too expensive to build the recycling facility to recycle those materials back into either new blades or something else. Wind is not as green as they claim it is.
All right. And actually, before we go on to Kevin's, we have a little follow-up. Mark, because it's well known that the perception of nuclear is quite dramatic, I guess, in a lot of this sort of public and sort of the popular culture output that there is in terms of what's being done to change that perception. Could you give us a little insight on that, or sort of what's
yeah
going on
so
there?
It's interesting because it's such a multifaceted discussion point. One is that the specific, I can talk specifically more about the U.S. I'm not as smart outside the U.S. when it comes to this stuff. So the Office of Nuclear Energy, which falls under the Department of Energy, it's one of the two major departments within there. They've actually brought in some real good communications experts to start communicating nuclear better, right? And then you have independent people like myself that have reached out, that have done, I think, a pretty good job of reframing it. We have a couple of pretty big names that are very pro-nuclear that have done some big things. If you actually look, April 1st through 3rd of 2019, famed cartoonist Scott Adams had a series in his Dilbert about Dilbert walking around with little super safe nuclear reactors that he could carry around, and
You're kidding.
basically showing what's that.
You're kidding me. That's so great.
Yeah. So Scott Adams, and then you've got guys like Naval Ravikant, big tech investor that's pro-nuclear, and then we've got Bill Gates, and so there's some big names that are really talking more nuclear. And then when you've got guys like Andrew Yang that are getting on the stage, I wish he would have talked way more about nuclear energy instead of UBI. Like, I think that was his win. That was his kill shot to get higher up, is if he'd have talked nuclear instead of gone with this, I'm going to pay you $1,000 a month. But instead, that's I'm not the politician. I'm not going to make those decisions. But I think there's a lot of movement. And then the other that we have is that we have all these small startup companies. Going back to what Alma's saying about these mom and pop shops, this is kind of like the best that the nuclear gets, is kind of these 30-person startups. And there's a 12-person startup out of San Francisco that submitted the first advanced reactor license in the history of the United States back in 2020. So, we're seeing these small startup companies in the nuclear industry that are actually, making huge leaps and bounds with all that. So.
All right. And Kevin, you seem to be bouncing in and out a little, but if you want to chime in just a little bit on public perception and all that.
Sorry about that. It's dropping plane.
I just quite
I had to reset my router. As far as public perception, I think that oil and gas definitely in some parts has a real bad misconception that, like Alma said, that we're this monster that is so detached from everybody, when in reality, like, yes, there are huge mega corporations that do it, but I would say 90% are very small mom and pop companies or startups, or people that may not be a startup, but they've always stayed small, or they're breaking into a new industry, kind of like we are here. And also just that, that oil and gas doesn't care about the environment, that oil and gas is just out here dumping oil into waterways and killing ducks and all this other stuff. And in reality, if you look at most major oil spills, a lot of them, I would say 90% of them were within the OSHA guidelines. Now, were they within API guidelines, which is our private industry standards? No, most of the time they're not, because our private industry standards are much higher than what the government or what most environmentalists would have you believe. So, and then when you look at, the EPA has been going at reducing carbon emissions from the oil and gas industry for 30 some odd years right now. And with ESGs and some other stuff like that, yeah, they've been able to get it down a little bit, but we've got, major industry leaders like Exxon and Conoco, even some of the stuff that we're doing over here, which are taking these well sites and making them carbon neutral, totally zero carbon, no emission. We're using everything that we're pulling out and repurposing it or burning it for some type of energy in order to power something else. That's a private industry standard that we've been able to come in and fix something that the government's been working on for 30 years. If we were left to our own devices, you wouldn't see pipelines just dumping into waterways. What you would see is 100% efficient oil and gas.
Yeah, to piggyback off of that, Kevin, I think of an example one of my economics professors used early in my college career. He was talking about a cookie company that has some waste product as a result of their cookie making. They have some cookies that just didn't stay intact, so they're in crumbs. Well, they're not going to just throw that away. What they're going to do is repackage that to some ice cream company that is going to use those crumbs to make their cookie crumble ice cream or whatever you have. So, I mean, business is really good at getting rid of its own waste. Are we perfect at it? No. But capitalism is iterative, which means we're more likely to get it right in the second try than we are on the first. To say nothing of the fact that my oil and gas boys love the planet. They love going hunting. They love going fishing. They are the last person that wants to see barrels and barrels of oil or brine, which is salt water, dumped into their lakes and rivers.
All right. Very cool. So one thing we were hearing a little about is in a few industries is actually sort of the small business innovation and things pushed. And I wanted to shift the conversation now to innovation more broadly, because there's a lot that the media likes to pick up on and say, oh, this is the next big thing. Oh, this is a potential game changer. Whether that's been new battery storage for wind and solar, whether that's been, to a lesser extent, nuclear innovations. We have a little more discussion of thorium-based nuclear. Fusion was in the news again, but that's been promised for some 30-odd years from my perspective. And I want to pose the question to all of you of what innovations, what technological changes do you really have your eye on? Do you think could be a real significant impact on the future of industry? And Mark, it sounds like you're ready to go.
Yeah. So the great thing about the nuclear industry is the amount of innovation, and it's not as innovative as the news makes it think out or makes you want to think. Is that it's basically stuff that we were doing back in the 60s that we've kind of, improved upon, right? So the big thing is that right now in the United States, all of our reactors are what are known as thermal reactors, and they produce that large quantity of waste, right? We only use 5% of the energy in our fuel. So there's innovation in fast reactors, and these fast reactors, they can operate with thorium, they can operate with spent nuclear fuel. Right. And so specifically, and prior to this program, I'm going to tout Oklo, that startup out in San Francisco. Oklo's Aurora design is going to use the waste from EBR2. That was one of those 1960s reactors called Experimental Breeder Reactor 2. It's going to use the waste from that for its first power supply. So the nuclear industry is going to take waste and use it as fuel so that we can extract the other 95% out of that. And then when you get into thorium, there's discussions about taking thorium and combining it with the fuels that we use right now. Instead of our fuel assemblies lasting 4.5 years, they're going to last, say, 20 years, right? So now I've reduced my waste by basically 1/4 from what it is now by using a mixture of uranium and thorium in the current commercial reactors. So talk about two crazy innovations where I'm taking the fuel that we have or the reactors we have, and I can make their fuel last longer with innovations with thorium versus using fast reactors. I can use nuclear waste. I can use thorium, a new fuel, and basically reduce or, basically maintain the waste about the same amount. And then when you get talking there's a company called Lightbridge, again, a small startup, where they have a fuel technology where the uranium atoms are closer together such that I can install this fuel into current reactors, and I can extend their fuel cycles by 33% and increase the power output by 17% at the same time. So there's crazy amount of innovation going on in the nuclear industry, and I've only scratched the surface. We could probably talk for 3 hours on the innovations in the nuclear industry.
I wanted to ask about something specific, if you have any thoughts on it. Small modular nuclear reactors?
So, all right, so small modular nuclear reactors. So the difference is that right now, most reactors planet-wide are about 1,000 megawatts. The definition of an SMR, small modular reactor, is about 300 megawatts. And we actually have great experience in the United States in constructing modular reactors. If you look right above my head, you see USS Washington SSN 787. that has a reactor that is basically built in a factory, right? So a factory actually builds the reactor core, and then you have two companies that actually assemble the guts of the reactor. They move modules between the two shipyards that build it, and then they assemble it in a final product, do the final testing, and then commission the ship, and it operates for 33 years on one reactor fueling, right? And there's a company called NuScale that their design is approved for operation, and they have a construction license in progress to build 12 of their units. And so it would be factory built. So you'd build the power unit, say, in one factory. You'd build your control room skid in another factory. You'd build, say, your turbine skid in another, and then your condensate skid in a different. And then you'd do as much testing individually, bring them together, do your integrated plant operations testing, and then you bring the unit online.
And at the risk of staying on nuclear for a little while, I did want to ask sort of what the industry perception and what your personal perception is on fusion power, and just how far into the future we'd have to be looking for that, and how big a difference it would make.
There is a lot of excitement about the tokamak out in France that's being built, but I am warily skeptical. Now, I'm a fission expert, not a fusion expert. So I come from a standpoint of, I have an energy system that, like oil and gas, like wind, that is proven to work with decades of experience behind us. The only known use I've seen fusion for was the hydrogen bomb at Bikini Atoll. So that's kind of my take on it, is that it's still kind of the weapons stage. There is another type of fusion-fission hybrid that's kind of exciting, that uses you basically fuse it's lithium with the neutron, and then it splits into 4 or 3 elements that are highly charged. So it's a low temperature thing, but it's like the super weird, unique thing that one of the engineers for the company reached out to me to talk about. But it's not fusion in what you're thinking of. You fuse a hydrogen and helium atom together to produce a lot of energy. This is more of you cause a split, highly charged particles, and you're extracting electricity from highly charged particles.
All right. Cool. And Jason, if you don't mind, I guess we'll go to you. And in particular, we wanted to hear a little about, there has been some mega battery storage that's been in the news lately with wind and solar to make those more efficient. And if you thought that innovation was as big as it was being made out to be, and if there's anything else within your industry that we should be keeping an eye on.
Things that I've personally seen haven't really been the battery storage. I don't know much on that particular innovation. I do know that since wind kind of hit the scene and took off generating power, we've made leaps and bounds in longevity, making our turbines last longer, meaning our blades, the use of VGs, just little fins on the blades so that they last longer. They clean the air up as they come off, and it doesn't damage the blades as much, making them last longer. We've done a lot of repowers that on 10 to 12-year-old sites that by human thought shouldn't be needing repowered and shouldn't need replaced, whereas now we're able to go 15 to 20 years just by adding some little fins on our blades. The blade design, the blade shape, all of that plays into it as well. There's been a lot of strides in going bigger, making one turbine make more power. The length of the blade, the size of the diameter of your rotor has helped with that. We've got, I think my company's building 3Xs, so they're 3 megawatt towers. Each tower produces 3 megawatts an hour in optimal winds. That being said, the first towers out in Temecula, California were static. They stayed one direction. They waited on the wind from that direction and only. Now we've got them that'll chase wind. They turn, they rotate. That's the industry standard. Is what we've seen on the news, is the newer ones that'll turn and chase wind, and it's come a long way in the short time it's been around, and it's quite impressive to me.
Hey, Nathan, can I talk to you about what the utilities think about battery storage? Because I do have.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so the utilities are actually real excited for battery storage, and that's to keep their oil and gas generators running 100% of the time. So the idea behind it is they would use the battery storage, basically put that on so that when you're at off-peak times, you're charging, and then when you're coming to peak hours, you're discharging. So that way you keep your oil and gas generators online 100% of the time. Because if you're burning fuel on one of those generators, you're making money. If they're sitting idle, they're not making money, they're not making energy, therefore they're not as useful. But if I could use a battery storage to make that up, and that's what the utilities want. They don't want to put it with their wind and solar, they want to put it with the grid itself to basically keep optimization, to keep every plant operating at 100% power 100% of the time. All
right. Okay, that's good to know. And then going off of that, Alma, do you want to talk about innovation within oil and gas? Because I guess we don't hear enough about that.
I am deeply underqualified to talk about that, so I was very excited to punt that one to Kevin, and then just in time he dropped off. Be it for. I guess I can speak to a kind of innovation that the rest of America I'm not sure would care about, but my own industry certainly would, and that's personnel management innovation. Because I work on managing that relationship between the small business and the large business that is paying them to get the job done. I think a lot about how to identify the all-star contractors and not the nonsense guys that are neglecting their employees or neglecting the environment in various ways, because your chain is only as strong as the weakest link. And if your supply chain is made up of these contractors that are careless and reckless and in some cases unethical, you can't really expect that much better for the rest of the industry. So my own company has been focused on solving that problem, but I mean, it's an invisible problem even to many of the people working here. So I don't expect it to captivate, MSNBC anytime soon. But I will say that if Kevin were here, I imagine he would be talking about the flaring technology. So flaring is what you do to natural gas that you don't have the infrastructure to pipeline somewhere else where you can use it. And so instead of just releasing it into the air as it is, you burn it off so that it's slightly less toxic to the environment. And what I believe Kevin's company is working on is diverting that excess fuel into something that's actually being used to, I think in his case, power Bitcoin. But in theory, it could be used to power anything else. And there he is, right on cue.
Hey,
talk to us about flaring, Kevin.
Hey, so I do want to mention that whole getting the right companies and all that, getting the right contractors, because my company recently experienced this. There's one of the major project managers for Westinghouse is going to prison because basically he lied. So there was 2 large-scale nuclear reactors under construction in South Carolina, and that entire company, because of that, is gone. Scanning as a corporation is gone and is now owned by Dominion Energy. So
that's a real thing that happens, and that speaks to how it's not an industry-specific problem. I mean, it's just a business problem, and the person who solves that is going to be a multi-millionaire. Hopefully, it's me, but I mean, probably not. I want to probably rather be getting married and having babies. But
it's probably a multi-trillion-dollar.
So, you think so?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Well, maybe you can introduce me to some of your people, and we can get the conversation going. But thanks for sharing that, Mark. I guess now I have the opportunity to punt it to Kevin to talk about innovations that you're seeing in our industry.
All right, Kevin, if you want to take it from there. He seems to be ducking the questions. What a shame.
It would appear he's not having very good service issues. Something I've seen in oil and gas, this is firsthand, that I've personally seen. We were drilling wells in Oklahoma, and I've seen them producing the natural gas over to run the rig instead of diesel. Right?
So they're using that
natural gas, 25% diesel, and running our cat generators to power our rig. And I thought that was really, really cool. And guys, this was 4 years ago that I was on that rig. So I've come a long ways from that, but I still think that is a really neat thing that was tried and worked, because I mean, we had no blackouts that whole well that I saw that happen, and that was a really neat thing to me as far as oil and gas goes.
Yeah, that's super fantastic. You're using what's literally right there on site to power your equipment on site. I think there's a company that I know who's working on, I think, bringing to market something very similar to that with some tweaks. And I'm not at liberty to speak about it, but let's just say I'm very, very excited about the flaring problem being resolved.
I'm not 100% sure that wasn't a prototype deal, but I just saw a strange line running across location and into my motor shed, and asked them what was going on with this, and they kind of gave me a brief. This is natural gas from a well we drilled over here, and we're pumping it over here to help run the rig so that it's more cost effective for the customer, and they own the natural gas, and it's just going to be flared, so we're going to burn it through our generators, and that's how that's going to work. So I was quite impressed with it, but I haven't seen it since.
That's
So,
fantastic.
Here's an interesting nuclear and oil and gas partnership that's innovative. Is that in the Northwest Territories, the northern regions of Canada, they want to bring in micro reactors. So you had small modular reactors, which are 300 megawatts down to 10 megawatts. Micro reactors are anything below 10 megawatts, and literally these things can be like on the size of a semi-truck trailer. And so bring in these micro reactors to produce the heat, so that you can extract your oil from your oil sands no matter what time of year it is. Because in the way that we generate power, basically 60% of the energy we produce is waste. It ends up being waste heat. So if you use that waste heat to then heat your oil sands, so that you can then extract the oil out of the shale throughout the entire year, instead of only when it's warm enough to be able to do that.
Whoa, that is so cool, Mark. I'd never heard of that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Shall we move on to the next
Yeah,
question?
I think we can move on to our last big question, which is taking off of the innovations and all of our sort of legislative shift is predictions. Basically, given all those innovations, given all the public pressure for this and that, and given the legislative movements, what does industry, or what does energy look like in 2030 and beyond? What does the breakdown look like? What changes? And what are your predictions for the industry for the future? What will be the fuel of the future? To put a little plug in to a nicely written article we had at Second Look recently.
I'm interested. Do you foresee an energy crisis? That's something I've been hearing about.
And actually, I guess we should touch a little more on that as well, in terms of the potential adverse impacts of this legislative shift, and whether what problems that's going to cause for industry, what problems that's going to cause for society, as we have potentially misconception driven, or perhaps ill-conceived shift, as some may perceive. And Jason, sounds like you're ready to go.
I don't foresee an issue with an energy crisis coming up anytime soon. Something that I've spoke about and I fully believe in is all three of these industries lean on each other back and forth. Whether wind's leaning on oil and gas and nuclear kind of have a partnership going. The company I work for actually has a nuclear division, so people that are my peers have worked in nuke, and that's a really cool thing. I don't see there being an issue with an energy crisis due to the wind's always blowing. It's highly unlikely for all of your nuclear reactors to go down, and they've been drilling wells in Midland, Texas since the dawn of time, and there's no signs of slowing down out there either. So there should not be a nuclear crisis in the foreseeable future, in my opinion.
All right. I think, and to clarify the point, I think most perceptions of an energy crisis are coming from oil and gas being regulated down to the point that nuclear and renewables aren't able to pick up the slack fast enough. And we end up with shortages, cost issues, and distribution issues, things like that. So in terms of specifically what
I think California is also like closing down our only nuclear plant, or some. I heard something about that. So
that's a great segue. I was going to jump right into that. So we're going to see localized energy crisis. I don't think it's globally we'll see an energy crisis, but in 2009, California began the rolling blackout program, which coincided with the shutdown of Santa Onofre Nuclear Generating Station north of San Diego. Right, so Diablo Canyon is set to shut down in 2025. The mayor of New York City has requested this summer that all of its citizens reduce their electricity demand. Otherwise, they're going to have rolling blackouts in New York City, which coincided with the shutdown of Indian Point Nuclear Generating Station. So every time we shut down nuclear power, we see energy crisis, they're localized energy crisis, because of how much energy these reactors produce. Now, when you talk about the future of nuclear, you've got Vogtle Unit 3 is supposed to go online late this year, early next year. Vogtle Unit 4 within a year of that. So those are two large-scale nuclear reactors, produce 1,100 megawatts apiece, that are going to come online. 2023, out in Idaho, you're going to have Oklo break ground on their Aurora project, and you're going to have NuScale Energy going to break ground on 12 of their power modules out there. That'll produce about 1,000 megawatts. That one reactor, Oklo's is a 1.5 megawatt, designed to power like a small town, university, hospital, complex type thing. Very different from the nuclear model that we use today. And that's just in the US. When you're looking worldwide, the Russians broke ground and they're building the BREST-300. It's a 300 megawatt reactor that is cooled by lead and runs on nuclear waste. The BN-800, as of last year, transitioned from running on nuclear weapons to purely on nuclear waste. So I'm talking about things that are existing. Egypt has just signed an agreement to build 4 nuclear reactors. Iraq is looking to build 8. Iran is looking to build more. The entire Middle East is going into nuclear energy. And that all became because of UAE bringing on their first reactor online at Baraka. Africa has like 6 nations that are getting ready to build nuclear reactors. NuScale Energy, not only are they going to break ground on 12, they have orders for 200 units under negotiation, right? So nuclear energy in the next 30 years is going to be taking off like it did in the 1970s.
All right. And do you think that's going to be at the heart of a shift away from oil and gas as we get into more regulation, more emissions legislation, or?
So here's the thing is that in what we're going to be seeing is that a lot of these nations don't have large amounts of energy, whether it's oil, gas, whether it's wind, whether it's nuclear. And so they're going to be coming up to an energy consumption level that would be on par with the United States, and it wouldn't necessarily impact oil and gas. By the way, all the Middle Eastern nations, the reason why they want to get into nuclear is so they can sell their oil and gas. That's literally in their legislative things. Like we can make more money selling oil and gas, that it makes sense to spend $5 billion a nuclear reactor and build 4, 6, 8, 10, 15 of them.
That does make sense. Make it an export. And Alma, your predictions for the future.
Ooh, well, that was, Mark, that was quite a battery of technical, very technical and in some cases political predictions. And I thank you for sharing all of that with us. My predictions are maybe a little more human nature related. I predict that the American consumer, is going to keep whining about problems that they don't understand very well. And they will keep asking for things that they don't actually want. And if they got them, they wouldn't be happy. But the market will try again, and the government will try again. And somehow we're going to land on our feet because, like I said, the consumer wants to get what it wants.
All right. Excellent. I guess, well, Kevin has been teasing us throughout these last few questions with his presence. But I guess for now, those are the big questions. Stacia, do you want to take it from here?
Yeah, let's wrap it up for now. Thank you all so much for joining us. It was a great discussion. I love all of your perspectives. It always surprises me. There's so much information that we normally don't hear about. So I appreciate that. Would you guys like to plug any of your projects, social media? Is there anywhere you want to direct people to find out more about you?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter is where I'm most active, and my handle is at @subschneider. That's SUB as in submarines, because there's one behind me because I served on 3 of them, and then my last name Schneider, SCHNEIDER.
All right.
And I see Alma's trying to follow me right now.
I did. Not only did I try,
say.
I succeeded. Fantastic. You can follow me on Twitter at HearAlma. That's HEAR Alma, ALMA. It's here like with your ears because I'm a singer-songwriter. I live a double life where I work in oil and gas and then I make music. And I also, you can learn more about my business on the contractor management side at cookcompliance.co. I love talking about this stuff, so I'd be happy to chat with anybody who wants to learn more.
All right. And Jason, where can we find you? Where can we find you?
I would prefer that not happen, honestly. As I work for a company, and they're very, very strict on don't say our name, don't say what you do, type of thing. So I would prefer to just stay abstinent in that.
Okay.
All right.
You know what, Jason, I can appreciate that, because when I worked for Dominion Energy, I would not ever say that I worked at Dominion, that I worked at a power plant, and I worked at Surrey Power Station. I would say I worked at a nuclear power plant in Virginia. People that were smart enough knew what that meant, but I can appreciate that. So I'll give you my perspective.
I'll tell you this. I work for one of the biggest companies on the planet, so they're real big about having their name out there, and it's a big thing, and I'd prefer to keep my job.
I understand.
All right, then.
All right.
You can check out more of our articles at secondlook.news, and we'll be back next time. Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Thank
Stacia.
you, everyone.
Thank you.